You draft 3 or maybe 4 wide receivers in NFL DFS. So knowing the right metrics to select those wide receivers is critical, and we'll go over them next. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Lee.
And I'm Gary Kurtzman, and we are the Fantasy Football Consultants. We're recording a series of shows to take a look at what are the right metrics to use for your projections to pick the winning lineups for both running backs, quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. Links to all these shows can be found in the show descriptions, and all are available on our YouTube channel. So, Eric, this show is all about wide receivers, and what do you say we hop to it?
Yeah, and I always have found wide receivers are the hardest one to kind of get my hands around for what the key metrics are. But what leads the list, number one?
What leads the list, number one, is not something that I think most people are taking a look at. It turns out, if you do the kind of analysis that we do, which involves analyzing every single NFL game for the past 10 seasons to look for correlation between different metrics and overall fantasy performance, what you will find is that wide receiver performance can be best gauged by air yards. I need to stipulate that this is for the X, the Y, and the Z receivers. There are basically 4 wide receiver positions. There's the X, there's the Y, there's the Z, and there's the slot receiver. Slot receivers, as it turns out, are different. I don't want to belabor that point, but air yards are better predictive than any metric for everybody other than slot receivers.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons of that is that there's more air yards for those wide receivers than the yards after the catch.
That is absolutely true. And what I want to do, just for simplicity's sake, is spend 5 seconds describing what the heck is an air yard. An air yard is the distance that a ball travels in the air before it hits the receiver's hands. And what you do for air yards is you sum up all of the air yards, right, to a specific wide receiver during the course of the game. So basically, you're telling 2 things for one metric. One is the distance of the routes they run, right? Because the more distance, the higher the air yards. But the other thing you're telling is volume. There's implicit volume there. Now, I think a lot of the viewers might think, gee, I would have thought that volume would have been the metric we would use, right? Either targets or receptions or maybe even yards, okay? Air yards does incorporate that concept, because the more air yards you have, obviously that's a volume-driven statistic. You add up all the air yards for the course of the game. That is actually more correlative than any other statistic that I've talked about, except, as you mentioned, for slot receivers, because slot receivers very often just run 5 to 10 yard routes over the middle. They don't get the opportunity for air yards that the rest of the receiving core does. And for that, it's more correlated to use number of targets. Again, it's that volume-driven statistic. It's just more reflective of the kind of routes that slot receivers run.
Yeah, and just to clarify, when we say air yards, another phrase in the business is ADOT, average depth of target. I just want to remind people, if you've liked the video so far, please do us a favor, smash the like button. And if you haven't yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that red subscriber button. Generally, we really would appreciate it. All right, Gary, you've got to also consider the game script. Now, this is difficult for wide receivers. It's not as obvious as with quarterbacks, running backs, and even tight ends. But the thing that you definitely want is a high-scoring game. Because I've said in many of these videos, the NFL is a passing league. The more scoring in the game, the more scoring for the wide receivers. So I think you want to take a look at the over and under, because the more that is scored, even if it's your team that's scoring, hey, that's great for your wide receiver. But if it's the other team that's scoring, that's also great, because your wide receiver is likely to be used in comeback mode.
Yeah, it's actually the only position. It's quite literally the only position in football where you love scoring, whether it's your team or the other team, right? Because like you mentioned earlier, if it's your team, hey, then part of that was probably from a wide receiver, pointage, right? On the other hand, if the other team scores, then, bearing in mind that when you're behind, your team throws just over 50% of the time. When you're ahead, they throw less than 40% of the time. That's a big differential for opportunity. So you're winning either way.
Yeah. The next metrics we want to talk about is you've got to look at the injury report. Now, I'm first to tell you, it is, if you told me, sorry, Eric, I'm only going to look at one position, I would say look at running back, but don't do that to me. Also look at wide receiver. Now, what are you looking for? So if a wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 is out on a team, it could provide a lot more opportunities for a wide receiver 3 or for the other wide receiver 1 or 2 that is not out. And your wide receiver, the one that you're selecting, obviously you want to make sure he's healthy, but we've seen over time that sometimes wide receivers can be used as a decoy. So you have to be careful if they're coming off an injury, and especially if they're coming off a concussion. Historically, they haven't done as well.
Yeah, and the variance is over 20%, so they really don't do as well. Very, very strong points. So we've talked about injuries, and we've talked about, opportunities and touches and yards. Still haven't talked about touchdowns. But why have we waited till the end to talk about touchdowns? Because in half PPR leagues, and especially in full PPR leagues, wide receiver scoring, less than 20% of the scoring is via touchdown. That's why it's less correlative. Frankly, that's why it's less important. But not to discount it completely, touchdowns are still important in football after all. How do you gauge what kind of touchdown opportunities your wide receiver is going to have? Eric, far and away the most correlative statistic, inside the 10 targets. Again, less important for wide receivers than, say, quarterbacks or running backs. Even the middle tier receivers have about the same reception rate, the same catch rate as elite receivers inside the 10. So it's all about opportunities. So this is just a numbers game. If your wide receiver can get, 5 or 6 red zone targets per game, the elite receivers, people like Cooper Kupp will, obviously that's a huge plus and the best predictor of touchdowns.
Yeah, for those money throws, which is to get the ball into the end zone, it is clear, and you guys know who they are. Certain quarterbacks have their favorites. And if you watch the game, sometimes they're planning to go to that guy from the very beginning.
All right, so we've just tossed 4 or 5 different metrics at you, which are the most predictive of wide receiver performance. And the question that you should be asking is, where do I find all those metrics? And Eric, we've got one easy to use and easy to sort place for all of those metrics. Why don't you tell the viewer about it?
Yeah, it's DFS Hub, and we're really excited to partner with them. We are officially an affiliate of theirs, and we've always looked for opportunities. We get a lot of different opportunities that come across, but ones that will help you, our viewers. And we think they have both a free account and a pro account, and we want to show you the power through a tutorial. All right, we're on the DFS Hub site, and specifically in their NFL lineup builder tool. And if we go to the left, we can see where you can use this tool whether we're playing on DraftKings or FanDuel. Right now, I'm showing on the main slate, but you can adjust the date to do a showdown slate for like Monday or Thursday games. Let me scroll down to the main area, the player list area of the NFL lineup builder tool. And I want to show it has all the metrics that we talked about on the show today. So it has average depth of target, which is the air yards. Now that comes from Pro Football Focus. You'll see there's just zeros here. I talked to DFS Hub, and all of that Pro Football Focus data will be loaded up exactly 1 week before the season starts. Here is effectively targets, it's opportunities, and they take the median opportunities they have had in the last 4 active games. So only looking at the games in which they were active. There's the over-under and opportunities inside the 10. Now, the only thing that I haven't showed you that we talked about on the show is the injury report. And that is so important when you're dealing with wide receivers or you're dealing with running back to keep up on the latest news. And it can be very time consuming. And DFS Hub can really help with that. How can they do that? First of all, far right-hand corner, they have over 4,500 news outlets. If you go on any specific player, it will give you the latest news, gives you the dates and the information on that particular player. And then there's one other tool that's going to help you with injuries. And I'm going to go that. It's outside of the NFL lineup builder. The tool is the NFL Fantasy Injury Report. and it lists all of the people who may be out. I think the projected status is a really important category here. And those players, for example, the projected status of J.K. Dobbins is currently doubtful. And you can look and see his number one backup is Mike Davis. So this is obviously something I'm going to continue to track, but Mike Davis becomes a great play because his price, which is only $4,400, if he's going to be the lead back on Baltimore playing the New York Jets. And you can see, you can just continue to go down this list, says who the players, who's questionable, and who their number one backup is, and their price. Now you can actually look farther to the right, and it will give you their second backup. So we just want to remind you, if you are going to sign up for DFS Hub, and we strongly endorse the product, please use our affiliate code, which is at the bottom of your screen and in our description. Let's go back to the studio and rejoin Gary Kurtzman.
In addition to this video series, we want to remind you that Fantasy Football Consultants has a 9-episode DFS Master Class available on YouTube, which does a very deep dive into all the tips, the tricks, the strategies, and the metrics to help you create those winning GPP and cash game lineups, all available on our YouTube channel.
And all completely free. Gary, it was great to go through these metrics with you. Thank you guys for joining us. Until we see you in the next video, take care, everybody.
See you next time.
On your screen is the NFL DFS Master Class series. And on the right side is the metrics to select the right tight end.